Yo, what's going on, snipers, and welcome to a different sort of video. So I figured with the expansion draft being literally right around the corner and also the protected lists and whatnot being out today, I would do a little video on my opinion who Seattle will be taking in the expansion draft. And I'm also going to be throwing them into NHL 21 so we could see how good of an overall team I built and all that sort of thing. And yeah, it should be pretty fun to do, I think, because I've never done something like this before. So first, before we actually get into my picks for who Seattle will be taking, let's get into the uniforms, because I actually did try and recreate the Seattle Kraken uniforms. I think I looked at some YouTube tutorials a little bit. Some of it is my own doing, but I think it turned out pretty good and should be kind of sharp to see what some of these players look like in a Kraken uniform. So yeah, that is my Seattle Kraken uniforms, and now we can get into who I have going to Seattle. So let's start off in team orders. So we'll go to NHL. And starting off with the Anaheim pick, I decided I think the best pick for them possibly would be somebody like Adam Henrique. Now, Adam Henrique is signed for a 3-year deal at 5.825. Is not terrible. He's not a bad player. If we look at his player stats, you can see he's not been a terrible player, and he's definitely a solid veteran to have a good two-way kind of player. So I think he would be a good pick for Seattle, and that's why I have Anaheim losing him to Seattle. So he would be our first pick. Then we head over to Arizona, and Arizona didn't really have a whole lot of interesting players out there, so I decided I think they would best take Christian Fischer. Now, Christian Fischer is one of the younger players that are available in this expansion draft. He's only 24 years of age, and he's not a bad player either. He's kind of like a solid bottom six option. Doesn't really put up a whole lot of points, but if he could get back to his numbers that he had in 2017-18, I think this is a pretty good pick to do. He's not a great defensive player, but then again, it could be because he's been playing in Arizona, but I think they would take him in the expansion draft from Arizona since it's not that bad of a pick. So that would be two of our players done. Now we go down to Boston. Now, Boston has a lot of interesting players expendable, like Tuukka Rask, for example, but their contracts are all over at the end of the season, so or they're all over technically. They're all like free agents, so they would have to re-sign them is the only problem. So I don't have them taking guys like Rask or Hall or Krejci because all their contracts are up. I have them taking Connor Clifton because Connor Clifton, let's be real, he's kind of like a solid top six option, maybe a like a seventh D option. He's relatively young as well, 25 years old, so not a bad pick, I would say. So I have Seattle taking Connor Clifton from Boston. Then we get into Buffalo, and Buffalo really has like barely anything available that's really intriguing to me. So the only pick I would make if I was them is taking a guy that went in the expansion draft, I'm pretty sure, to Vegas, and that is Cody Eakin. So Cody Eakin, solid bottom six option again, solid face-off man, I believe. I don't know if it has the face-off numbers, is it? Yeah, it does. He's a solid face-off man. Could be maybe used as depth, could be a fourth line center for them, so I have him as a pick for them. And yeah, it should be an intriguing piece if they actually do take him, which I think they could because there's really not really that much available for Buffalo, so Eakin might be the most logical option. Then for our next pick, we have Calgary. Now, this one's a really interesting one. They could choose Mark Giordano, who has 1 year where he would actually be signed with Seattle. The only thing about Mark Giordano, what I think at least, is he deserves to retire in Calgary, and also the fact that he is like 36 years old, so probably 37 now, actually, I don't know, but still, I don't think Mark Giordano would be I think Mark Giordano could go to Seattle, but personally, if I was Seattle and I was looking towards maybe more of a younger blue line, I would take somebody like Oliver Shillington, because I'm actually a really big Oliver Shillington fan, and he hasn't really gotten much of an opportunity in Calgary. Like, if we look at his player stats, he played 38 games in 2018-19, had 8 points, which was respectable. 2019-20, he played 48 games and had 7 points. But then 2021, I think he was only used as like a depth option, and he barely played, and he was like a healthy scratch at that young of an age, which is kind of dumb. So if I'm Seattle, I would be taking Shillington just because I think he could actually crack the lineup potentially and be a solid offensive defenseman for them for maybe the future. Then we get into Carolina, and Carolina, I have them taking, who was it? I gotta look at my giant list. I had them taking Brock McGinn. Now, Brock McGinn would be a solid, like, kind of bottom six defensive player as well, solid penalty kill guy. And also, he is a UFA technically, but I still think they would take Brock McGinn because Brock McGinn's a good solid bottom six option, but they do have other choices. Like, I think Nino Niederreiter was there. Jake Bean would be a good choice as well because obviously he's only 22 years old, or 23 probably now. But I have them taking Brock McGinn. Then we get into the Chicago Blackhawks, and from Chicago, I have them taking Calvin DeHaan just because he's another solid top six defensive option, and he's only signed for 1 year, so you do have a contract you can move if need be. But yeah, he's a solid defensive defenseman, so I have them taking him. Then from Colorado, I have them taking JT Compher. Now, the reason because of JT Compher is like a lot of these other guys is that he's a solid younger bottom six option, 25 years of age, probably 26 now. Actually, yeah, 26 years old. So yeah, he would just be a solid bottom six option, and he's also had some actually decent numbers in Colorado for his amount of games he's played. Like, as you can see with these 3 seasons, at least that are listed in NHL 21, he's put up around 30 points a season in only 60 something games. So if he's given more of an opportunity in Seattle, I think he could put up like 40 something points at least, maybe even more than that. But yeah, I think that would be a solid pick for Seattle to make. Then we get into Columbus, and now this one was an interesting one because Max Domi was left expendable. Now, Max Domi isn't a fantastic player, I would say, but I think he would be a good choice for them. Is he making a lot of money? Sure, he's making 5.3 for 1 more year, and then he's a UFA, but he's only 26, so I think you can't go wrong with taking Max Domi, and then maybe if he's good enough, re-signing him to a long-term deal, but I don't know if that will be the case with Seattle, but I think Seattle would take him since he's probably the best player available on Columbus. Unless you want to take guys like Kevin Stenlund, who is available, I think, and I think Dean Kukan was there too. Then we get into Dallas, and Dallas I didn't really see much interesting, but the one player I thought would be okay, who is an upcoming RFA, is Nick Camano. Now, Nick Camano's barely gotten into the NHL, but he's still a relatively young piece. He's only 22 years old, so he could be played in the minors if need be, or he could be a bottom six option. So yeah, I think he would be a decent choice for them to make from Dallas. And then we get into Detroit. In Detroit, I didn't really have much interesting except for I decided them to choose Dennis Cholowski. Now, Dennis Cholowski is only 23 as well, so this is another younger defenseman, but he does have some upside, I believe, wherever the heck I think he is. Where did he is? Is he in the AHL in this? He might be in the AHL in this. Let me just check. Grand Rapids. Yeah, he's in the AHL, but I think Dennis Cholowski would be a pretty solid option. Obviously, his defensive numbers from playing a little bit in the NHL are not that great, being a minus 46 in 88 games, but that's what happens when you play for like a rebuilding team like Detroit. So I think he would be one of the best options for a pick from Detroit, so we'll take Dennis Cholowski. And then we get into our pick from the Edmonton Oilers. Now, Edmonton didn't really have anything intriguing out there, at least to me, so I decided they would take the injury-riddled Oscar Klefbom. Now, Klefbom is signed for 2 years at a little bit over $4 million, but he has been injured quite a bit over his career. As you can see, since 2017-18, he's only been playing like 60 games a year. So if he could stay healthy, then he's definitely a good choice to make, but I don't know if he would be able to stay healthy, but I still think he would be a good choice to make for Seattle. Like, yeah, if he at least could play some of their games, I think that's a decent choice because there's not really much else you could take from Edmonton. Then we get into the Florida Panthers, and from Florida, I had them taking Chris Driedger just based on the reports, and Chris Driedger is actually a pretty solid backup goalie, at least with a good team like Florida was. So I think Chris Driedger is a good choice to make. I'm a little bit biased as well because he played with my Sens, but yeah, he had really good numbers in 2019-20, and I'm pretty sure in 2021 as well. So we're going to take Chris Driedger just based on the reports. And then if we go to the Los Angeles Kings, I have them taking Andreas Athanasiou because he's also an RFA, and they could sign him to a decently long deal if they want to. But he's got really good speed. He's also a solid point producer when he gets time. Like, he had 30 goals in 2018-19. I almost forgot about that. But yeah, if he could get going offensively, this is a really good pick, I think, for Seattle to put into maybe their third line, maybe their second line. So I think they take Athanasiou from LA, even though Jonathan Quick is available. And Jonathan Quick is a little bit too old, though. I don't think he's going to get taken by Seattle. Then we get into Minnesota, and Minnesota didn't really have much intriguing to me, at least, because they recently bought out like Parise and Suter and whatnot. So the pick I have them taking is Nick Bjugstad, because Nick Bjugstad's on a relatively cheap contract, I believe. He's not a bad player to have. He doesn't really play a lot, at least. Actually, no, he does play a decent amount, but he's not a bad player as well, kind of like a top 9 option. And yeah, I don't know if he's had injury problems in the past. Maybe he has, but I would still take him. I think he's not that bad of a player. Then from Montreal, this one was a little bit of more of a meme pick, just because the fact I wanted to see Habs fans go crazy about this is Carey Price going to Seattle. Now I don't know if he would actually go to Seattle, because Seattle would have to pay him, I think it was like $11 million in like some random bonus or something in September, and he is also making $10.5 million for the next 5 years, which is a very steep contract for his age and for the numbers he puts up during the regular season. But for the memes, I think I'm gonna have Carey Price going to Seattle. There was also some other interesting pieces, like Jonathan Drouin's a decent one, and then there was ones with like contracts that are up for renewal, like Thomas Tatar. There was guys like Shea Weber because of his injury problem that he's going to probably miss the entire season. So I think Carey Price would be a good choice, definitely to have as a good goalie. But at the same time, I think logically speaking, Jonathan Drouin could be the pick for Montreal instead. Then if we go to the Nashville Predators, who recently made a pretty big trade when they traded away Ryan Ellis, I had them taking Yakov Trenin. Now, this is a little bit of a one that's kind of random, but Nashville didn't really have much intriguing to me. Yakov Trenin's another younger kind of guy that I could see kind of putting up some okay numbers. And yeah, I think he's a decently skilled player as well, if I'm not mistaken, because I've seen some of his highlights. He's not a bad player at all. And if he can put up some numbers like he did in the AHL, I think he could be a pretty good pickup for Seattle. So I have them taking Yakov Trenin from Nashville. Then we go to New Jersey, and this one's just based on where the player played in junior, and I have them taking Ryan Murray from New Jersey, because Ryan Murray actually played for Everett in the WHL, which is in Washington State. So I just have there's a little connection between Seattle and Ryan Murray, I guess, to an extent. And yeah, that's why I have them taking Ryan Murray. Even though he is injury prone, pretty much like Oscar Klefbom, I have them taking Murray. Then we get into the New York Islanders, who left some pretty intriguing players expendable, like Josh Bailey and Jordan Eberle and stuff like that. I have them taking Jordan Eberle because Jordan Eberle is also a pretty solid player to put into your top 6. If he could put up numbers like he did like in these earlier years with Edmonton, he could be definitely a really good player for like your top 6. So I have them taking Jordan Eberle from the Islanders. Also, that will save the Islanders a little bit of cap space, which is good as well, because he is making 5.5 for the next 3 seasons. Then from the New York Rangers, this one was a little bit of an intriguing one. I have them taking another young player, and that is Julian Gaucher, who really didn't get the correct lineup, I don't think, this much this season. I could be completely wrong with that. But as you can see, he was in Carolina, went to New York, but he's still a really young piece. I think Seattle is going to take him, and maybe he becomes that top 6 forward type of player that he's supposed to be. Maybe he becomes more of a bottom 6 kind of grindy type of dude. But I think that would be a good choice for Seattle to make. Then from the Ottawa Senators, this is more based on what I would like to see. And I would like to see them take Matt Murray, but I don't have them taking Matt Murray. I have them taking Chris Tierney, because Chris Tierney would just add a little bit more center depth to this team. He could be like a third-line center, maybe even a fourth-line center, or even maybe a second-line center if you don't have that good of centers. I think he would be a pretty decent choice, and he's only making 3.5 for 1 more year, so you could always move him at the deadline if you're not contending. So I have them taking Chris Tierney. Then from the Philadelphia Flyers, I have them taking James Van Riemsdyk, who has the most expensive contract on this team except for Carey Price so far. And he's making $7 million for the next 2 years, which is a little bit pricey, but he is a good goal scorer if you put him next to some good passers. And yeah, obviously he's had some pretty solid career numbers, so I have him taking JVR. Next from Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh actually left some really intriguing players available, like Jason Zucker. I think would have been an interesting piece, but for my choice, I have them taking Marcus Pettersson on defense, because Marcus Pettersson's a pretty underrated defenseman. He's also decently young too, so this could be just a really rock solid defensive option for your top 6 or even your top 4. So I think this is a no-brainer for Seattle to do, but there is other options out there if they want to take him. Then from San Jose, I have them taking Ryan Denato, because Ryan Donato is another younger player. Once again, he is an RFA this season, but he does have some solid attributes in terms of, like, he's a decent scorer. I guess he scores more than he assists, but he's another young piece, and I think they could still use him probably on like a bottom 6 option, and maybe he becomes a good like top 6 option at some point, maybe not, but still I think a decent young player is not a bad option to do. Then from St. Louis, I have them taking Vince Dunn, because Vince Dunn is, let's be real, they probably won't take Vladimir Tarasenko because of injury precautions, even though he is a very good player when he is healthy. As you can see, 10 points in 10 games, and in back year, like 70-point seasons. But the only problem is that injury bug that he's been having like the last while. So I do have them taking Vince Dunn, because Vince Dunn is another solid young defensive option who could develop into being probably a top 2 defenseman for this team at some point, because he does put up solid numbers. Like, he had 35 points in 18-19. Like, he scores a decent amount of goals also for a defenseman, so that's also a good sign. So I have them taking Vince Dunn. Then going on to the Stanley Cup champion winning Tampa Bay Lightning. Tampa had a lot of intriguing pieces. Now, you guys would probably have me choosing guys like, who was available, like Andre Palat. There was also like Yanni Gourde. I believe Tyler Johnson was there. Maybe not. I don't know. Alex Killorn was there for sure. David Savard, that type of thing. But I have them taking, for some reason, I have them taking Jan Ruda, because Jan Ruda is also a solid defensive defenseman. I have them taking him because of cap reasons, just because I don't want this team to be super over the cap or just having not a lot of cap space. By the end of this, I'll tell you guys how much cap space is available for this team, but I think they will take Jan Ruda because he's a decently cheap option, and he's a really solid defensive defenseman, as you would have seen probably in the Stanley Cup Finals. Then from Toronto, I have them taking, Alex Kerfoot. Now, they did make a trade for Jared McCann, so Jared McCann could be the pick, but Kerfoot's not a bad option as well, because he's decently young still as well. He's like 26 only. He's a decent playmaker, puts up some solid numbers when he is on like power play and whatnot. If he could get back to his numbers that he had in Colorado, I think that is a definite win for Seattle to take somebody like Kerfoot. If not, they could always go with McCann. Then we get into the Vancouver Canucks, and they didn't really have anything super intriguing to me, so I have them taking Travis Boyd, because I think he could just be a solid defensive bottom 6 option like a lot of these guys. And yeah, he could play center, I'm pretty sure. So I think he definitely can play center. But yeah, he's a center and a winger, so decent like kind of bottom 6 option, maybe a depth option too. But I think that gives the team a little bit more depth in terms of center, because center is very important. And then from Vegas, obviously they can't take anybody because Vegas is exempt, which is kind of weird, but at the same time it makes sense. So from Washington, I have them taking Vitek Vanacek, because Vitek Vanacek is a young goalie, could definitely play as their backup, could play as maybe a third-string goalie. But he had pretty solid numbers for his first NHL season, and he's had some solid AHL results as well, especially in 2019-20. And yeah, since he's only like 25, I think now, he's a decent goalie option for this team. So I have them taking Vanacek. And then finally, from the Winnipeg Jets, I have them taking Dylan DeMello, because once again, this is another solid defenseman. Doesn't really put up offensive numbers, but is really solid in his own zone. And yeah, he's a pretty solid piece, and he's making like $3 million for the next 3 years, which is also a pretty solid contract, I would say, for a defenseman of his caliber. So yeah, that's pretty much what I have Seattle looking like for this expansion draft. Based on cap friendly, their projected cap hit is $69 million with all these players signed, but they would have like a lot of guys that were up for renewal, including Trenin, I think. Wait, no, not Trenin. Including Brock McGinn, who's a UFA, Denato and Athanasiou is RFAs, Camano is an RFA, Boyd is a UFA, And then on defense, Chalowski, Shillington, and Dunn are all RFAs, and Ryan Murray's a UFA. And then the only UFA goalie is Chris Driedger, so they wouldn't have a lot to technically re-sign, and they would still have $12 million, like 12.5 pretty much, in cap space to get more players via free agency or trade-wise. So I think this is a pretty solid roster for the most part. And now for the final thing, we could take a look at what the ratings would be in NHL 21 for something fun, and according to this, they are an 87 overall, which is not terrible. That's pretty respectable. Don't know how that compares to the rest of the league. But if we go to play now, let's take a look at their individual ratings. So if we go over to custom teams and Seattle, so they got 87, 87, 91. So a good goaltending team just because we added Price and they overrate Price in this game a lot. But the 87, 87 is not too bad for offense and defense. And for fun, let's take a look at what the AI set up as their lineup, because I haven't actually checked that. And also, who would they put as their captain? Not that they would probably announce a captain until like a couple of years from now. But let's take a look at who they would have as their captain based on this game. So, auto-adjusted, and they would put JVR as their captain, Eberle as their assistant, and Clefbaum as an assistant, which is a little weird. Interesting. And let's go to edit lines and just take a look at what they would have their projected lineup looking like. So for Seattle's first season, they would have JVR, Domi, Eberle according to this game, Athanasiou, Henrique, and Denato, and then Kerfoot, Tierney, and Comfer, Fisher, Bukestad, and McGinn. That's not a bad team. I don't mind this team actually at all, how they look in terms of forwards at least, because like that top six looks pretty good. For the most part, Denato, a little bit of a weaker player to have up there. Like, I would probably change Kerfoot or something. But having, like, Comfort and Tierney on your third line is pretty good. And then fourth line-wise looks pretty solid, too. Defensively, they're not too bad. They're more defensively minded. I would probably slot Vince Dunn into the top four at least. And then maybe move somebody like Calvin DeHaan down. So it'd be more like something like... yeah, something along these lines would make maybe more sense. Definitely Ruda would be down. Maybe I'd actually put DeHaan up. Yeah, I'd probably do something along these lines. I don't know. And then in terms of the goaltending, obviously I don't think Carey Price is actually going to get claimed, but if he did, it will look pretty good in terms of goalies. And yeah, obviously this depth would change a little bit because Pedersen I don't think would be scratched. And then Vanacek would probably play maybe as backup. I don't know. Maybe he would be sent to the AHL. And then a lot of these other guys would probably be playing in the AHL and, yeah, that type of thing. So, I think overall, it's not a bad squad. Let me know what you guys think down below of what my roster looks like. Do you guys think it's a realistic roster? Do you guys have any other opinions? Like, let me know what your roster would look like for Seattle. Kind of curious on what other people have projected their team looking like. So, anyways, guys, that's going to do it for this little video. Let me know what you guys think down below, and I'll see you guys next time.